right, man. Sebastian Fundora packs up Keith Thurman. Keith one time probably going to be done. Only took one time. And it wasn't surprising exactly how you thought it. You had these Keith Thurman followers or the bots that PBC bought for Keith Thurman. The production was trash for this fight. It was a straight to DVD type of production. This is a horrible card. Keith Thurman just didn't have a jab to cut the distance. He didn't have a style to cut the distance. Town was talking in our chat and said it was talking about Sebastian Fundora left glove. Was talking about his left glove, and he thought something was fishy with his left glove. And I'm not surprised, bro. I think I ain't no way he can make that weight at 6'6", bro. I think you getting help making that weight, bro. That's just my opinion on it. Nice kid it seems to be, but yeah, man. I mean, as far as the glove, I wasn't too focused on it. I was paying attention how he was throwing it and how I was kind of looking. It kind of looked a little bit fishy, but Keith just didn't have the style. He didn't have the jab. You know, for Fundora, you got to control the lead hand, or you got to be able to cut the distance off. And when you get inside, you got to be able to turn them. You can't sit on the inside with your head over your knee and sit there and exchange with them. You have to show them angles once you cut that distance, or if you're gonna get them from the outside, you got to be jab dominant. You know, you got to take that jab away. You got to feint the jab, come over the top with a right hand. You know, when he doubled up his shots, it left him open, but he had some success. He just didn't have the reach to do it. He didn't have the styles to do it. You know, you got to be feinting. You got to be, kind of judicious with your foot movement. And, Fundora, all he did was stay behind his jab, wait for Keith Thurman to try to make a mistake, and took it straight to Keith Thurman, and then once Keith started to fade a little bit, he started to catch Keith pulling out or punching. Then he started to close the gap and throwing punches at Keith Thurman. So, to beat somebody that tall is just angles and jabs, or you got to be able to close that gap on some Mike Tyson type stuff and get in there and turn them. You know what I'm saying? But you gotta control the lead hand. And for a guy that's just learning to use his reach, you gotta control it. You gotta dominate it. You gotta dominate the jab. You gotta take away his jab. Use your jab. And just come and just punch with him. Keith tried to throw the body work, but Keith is not a body puncher. On the broadcast, they tried to say Keith Thurman was a body puncher, but Keith Thurman is not a body puncher. So they tried to be like, oh, Keith is not a good body puncher. Keith doesn't have a good jab. Keith likes to throw hooks, and Keith was talking about how good his sparring was, and it wasn't good enough. I fired my strength and conditioning coach. I had a fat camp after the original way. Like I said before, Keith got hurt by Brock Jarvis. You know what I'm saying? He got hurt by Brock Jarvis in that fight. Keith is just not durable. He can't take especially at 37. I mean, really wasn't nothing he can do. It was a bad style. He couldn't weave his way in and cut the distance off, even like Lubin did. He didn't have that. Didn't have a great lead jab. Couldn't take away. Keith Thurman is a hook master. He sounds smart outside the ring, but inside the ring, I don't think it's a bunch of intelligence there. I'm not saying he's stupid. But yeah, Fundora did what he's supposed to do. A lot of people saying it's unfair, but he has been beat before. He's been dropped before. I think he's fishy. That's just my opinion on it. From the controversy around his glove with the Lubin fight to Town talking about the glove tonight. I'm talking about at 6'6", how do you cut down to 154 pounds? I think it's all fishy, bro. And to be that big of a fighter and that interesting of a fighter and exciting of a fighter, nobody come to watch him fight. So, maybe the public feel like it's an unfair advantage, but if you're keeping it a bean, you have to dominate that jab. You have to take away the jab, and or you got to put him on the back foot. You have to put him on the back foot. And the thing about a lot of them dudes that put him on the back foot, they lead their chin right over their knee. You can't do it. Once you put them on the back foot, you gotta be spinning them. You gotta be stepping over, using that angle. Or you got to tie him up. But if you sit there with him like this and you exchange, he just going that little pity pass shit that he do. So when you in the inside with him, you get yours, either you smothering them or you spinning out. You have to spin out, drop your weight, spin out. and then maybe you spin out, and then you act like you gonna reset or you faint, and then you come with your punches again. You know, a guy like Hagler would chop him down. That's just how you gotta fight him. I mean, on the outside, yeah, if you can, like I said, you gotta mount off it. So how do you cut the distance off like that? You gotta have something that he respect to the head. Did he, and then probably sneak him to the body, and that's how you get the respect to the head. But um, I don't know. Maybe Virgil Ortiz can beat him. A little bit more explosive, a good puncher, good conditioning, good. Seem to have a good chin, but it's all about angles when you're dealing with Fundora, whether it's on the inside or the outside. It's and not them long angles that Keith Thurman was taking, where you come in. If you're gonna dart in and out of range, touche. You gotta have the legs, you gotta have the stamina to do so. And Keith Thurman was too old. He wasn't as quick as he used to be. And the thing about Keith is he load up on his shots, so the shots really wasn't going like that. But he keep Fundora a couple of times with a couple good shots when he doubled the stuff up. When he doubled it up, he cut the distance on Fundora. So maybe you throw a throwaway punch, but to be honest with you, he should have been aiming at that bicep. He should have been aiming at that solar plex, and he should have been dropping that right to the body. He should have. That's what he should have been at. You know what I'm saying? When you're on the outside, you got to feint. You got to go. You got to take chances. That feint would have froze Fundora, and you would have been able to probably touch the body, touch the head here and there. But he didn't feint enough. Wasn't enough feints. And I know it's different when you're in there with a guy with that size, but and then when he doubled it, when he threw combination punches, he had a lot of success. So if he would have been able to have a better jab and feinted a little bit more. I think he had more success. But Fondora's nothing special. He just gonna stay behind his height, and then once he feel you starting to fade, he gonna close the gap and get reckless. So, in my opinion, it's nothing special but his height and his reach. But it can be what he tell him in the original Mortal Kombat. Goro can be killed. He been beat before. He been dropped before. But I do think it's something fishy about him, in my opinion. You that tall, how can you cut down to 154 pounds? And then why do these guys' face look like this sometimes, and then some guys' face don't look like that? You know what I'm saying? Like when he fight brothers, do they let him load his glove? I wouldn't put shit past PBC, to be honest. I'd agree. Something fishy with that fucking that left hand, and he a southpaw. Something fishy with that left hand. Real talk. 'Cause look how Lubin faces look. Look how his something fishy. But if you're gonna beat him, you got to control the lead hand. You got to use angles. You got to be able to throw combination punches. You know what I'm saying? This simple as that. Now, if you a guy, who can get on that inside and really cut that distance off, you probably beat Fundora easy if you a guy like Chavez, if he can make that way to, in his prime. A guy like Hagler. Ain't too many of those guys today. You know what I'm saying? Ain't too many of those guys today that fight that style. Angelo Leo is a guy that closed that gap that can close that gap. Other than that, man, I've seen Fulton like close the gap on some guys sometimes. That's really nice. Forte, but he can do it. The real inside fighters, the real gritty guys like James Kirkland would have James Kirkland would have gave him a good fight. I don't know, either he would have got, Fundora would have got him. Kirkland had the best defense, but he was going to close that gap, and Angulo was going to close that gap. He needed to fight somebody. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. would close that gap. It ain't too many dudes that's really fighting that style no more. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's like a Provodnikov, Madonna, guys who going to close that gap. You don't have, think about it. I mean, at welterweight, out of the guys I could think, the closest guy is to that is Stayonis. And the closest guy to 154 pounds, just thinking off the top of the dome, might be Virgil Ortiz. It might be Virgil Ortiz. So he's fortunate enough not to have a bunch of those guys who can close that gap on him with that aggressive style. So now you're looking for a lot of guys to be able to box on the outside, stick on the outside, use angles. But we all knew this was inevitable for Keith Thurman, 37 years old, highly inactive. He went out on the Shield. He was still trying to go, but Fundora was doing damage. So, it is what it is. You live and you learn. And, I mean, this was inevitable. Anybody in their mama knew this was going to happen. Keith Thurman didn't have an inside style. Keith Thurman didn't have a jab. And keep Thurman loaded up on shots. Therefore, their shots are telegraphed. So, hey, that's just my humble opinion on it. Fundora winning 6. Hit the link in the description. Join the Patreon. Find me on X, Facebook, Kick, Twitch, the Instagram, the whole nine. The link says find me everywhere. The link tree. Peace.